This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. Superman is going to be absolutely awesome. Just wanted to say that. We also got a massive show coming up for you. We're going to be speaking to a defense guru. This guy knows everything about everything. He's going to tell us what's really going on with Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese. Are they really no speakies? What's going on with Australia's relationship with the US? What's really going to happen between Israel and Palestine and Iran? Amazing interview. You won't want to miss that. And it's just incredible. We're going to give you a spoiler alert. We've just delivered peace in the Middle East again. Plus, what's really going on with Albo and that speech? Well, I was in the room for that speech that everyone's talking about, and it's not quite what everyone else is saying it is. I've also got proof positive that the Glastonbury rockers, the punk rockers, Bob Vylan, I've got proof that they don't actually give a rat's about Palestine for all their big talk. I'm going to actually prove it to you live here on air. And Superman is going to be awesome. Don't forget that. All that and more coming up. So first up this week, Superman is going to be awesome. And Albo is also pretty awesome. He delivered a speech on Saturday that got everybody absolutely frothing at the mouth. That you would think that Australia had just sort of seceded from the rest of the Western world, just thrown the ANZUS Treaty into the bin, set fire to AUKUS and become a revolutionary republic like North Korea. I was actually in the room when Albo delivered the speech. I was invited by the people who invited him to give the speech. So the head of the John Curtin Research Centre, it was the John Curtin oratory. It was at the 80th anniversary of John Curtin's death. This is, of course, Labor's probably most celebrated Prime Minister. This is the guy who literally saved Australia. He was the Prime Minister in World War II, and when Singapore fell and the British retreated from the Southeast Asia region and ran back with their hands between their legs because they'd been absolutely routed, and the Japanese were moving through Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Burma, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, you name it. It was John Curtin who said, right, we are defending Australia, and if the UK is not going to help us do it, we are turning to the US. And he actually went over to the US, he gave speeches to the US, and he says, I am here asking you to help us. We are turning to you. He did it publicly, as well as, of course, privately, and in a shameless, almost a literally shameless fashion. He did it in a proud Australian, unapologetic way. And that was what Anthony Albanese was picking up on in the speech that he gave. I was sitting there literally right next to the head of the John Curtin Research Centre, a bloke called Nick Dyrenfirth, really sound guy. He's been on this podcast, as you know. He's on the right of the Labor Party, which puts him in the sort of sensible centre of mainstream politics. He's a pro-Israel Jewish Australian himself. And this is the organisation that, this is very much a Labor right think tank. This is a sensible, thoughtful, intelligent, serious organisation. And these are the guys who invited Albo to speak in Sydney on Saturday night. And the one thing that Albo did do, however, which was very deliberate, was on top of saying how great John Curtin was and everything he'd done and how he'd pivoted from the UK to the US, Albo made a point of saying that Curtin wasn't actually just slavish to the US, that he was much more than that. Now, I'll take you through how he did that very, very shortly. But this, of course, led to people jumping up and down and saying, oh, Albo's trying to move Australia away from the US. He's trying to say we don't need the US anymore. It's all over. Now China's going to invade us and no one's going to help us. It's Armageddon and he can't even get a meeting with Donald Trump. And we'll unpack all that with our special guest later on. But here's the first thing. There will, of course, be other people saying, Albo said nothing of the sort. What are you talking about? He never said that. And you've got to sort of pull apart the speech and interpret it in a really specific way to extract that message from it. And often when you are giving speeches like this or you're talking about diplomatic international relationships, it's so opaque and oblique and kind of sideways. The language, and they explicitly train diplomats to speak this way. You speak in such a way that it is incredibly difficult for anyone who doesn't speak diplomatese to actually pin down what you are saying. But people who do speak diplomatese and, do know where all the various, where the exact sort of pinpoint location of the different countries' positions are, can detect any slight shift in tone or any slight, and sometimes it can just be a word or, it's ever so slight, and it's always kind of askance. It's never a direct statement. It's always a bit of a sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And there was a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink in Albo's speech, and this is what it looked like. This is where it came, and again, this is how kind of subtle it is, but how significant it is, because of course, eagle-eyed people who noticed it are the ones sort of blowing up and, quite frankly, overreacting a bit. But they were right to notice it, and this is the example that Albo gave of John Curtin standing up to the Americans, fiercely standing up to the Americans for Australia's interest. Now, we know that he stood up to Churchill and the UK. We know that after the fall of Singapore, which completely blindsided Churchill and the British, that this was a catastrophe. And Churchill basically said, right, we're out of here. We're just going to fight this war in Europe. And they wanted, certain exceptions, the British did stuff in Malaya and Burma and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, they wanted Australian troops in Burma. They wanted to send, now Myanmar, they wanted Australian troops to be sent to Burma, and Curtin basically said, "F that, no way. We need every single Australian we have defending Australia." And that was 100% the right call. And there's debate about how serious there was of any an intention on the part of the Japanese to actually invade Australia. But they did bomb Darwin, and they did have subs in Sydney Harbour. And so there is every reason to suggest that if Curtin hadn't done what he did, Australia would, at the very least, been vulnerable to Japanese invasion and potentially a vassal state of the Japanese Empire in Southeast Asia, and at the very worst, subject to an all-out invasion. So Curtin makes the right call. He stands up to Churchill and says, no, we are not sending Australian troops to Burma to protect your colonial interests there. And Albo goes out of his way to mention in his speech that the US also agreed with the UK that maybe Australia should send some troops to Burma. Now, I'm pretty sure that the US probably didn't give a rat's about what happened to British colonies in Southeast Asia, except insofar as it affected US interests. And let's not forget that the US was a republic, even though America does unofficially have an empire. In theory, they're opposed to empire. They don't like the idea of it. They themselves were founded by rising up and throwing off the yoke of empire. And so I think the conversation went a lot like Churchill going, "You have to stay in Burma. Get to Burma. We need an empire. Get your troops to Burma. Don't you agree, FDR?" And Franklin Delano Roosevelt were going, yeah, all right. Yeah, sure. Whatever you say. Yeah, cool. Whatever. But Albo made the point that the US agreed that even as the US was just entering the war because the Japanese had invaded Bomb Pearl Harbor, even as the US was starting to deploy US troops in and around Australia, oversexed, overpaid, and over here, as they were famously described, that the US was also all in on sending Australian troops to Burma, which it probably was if it was either that or American troops. Oh, yeah, no, don't. Yeah, send the Australians, not us. But I think it's fair to say this was not a cornerstone of United States World War II geopolitical and military strategy. But Albo just added it in there. He added it in there just to make the point that while Australia was standing up to the UK and saying no, it was also almost by default because the US just happened to, in passing, agree with the UK, was also standing up to the US. And so he did actually put that little Easter egg in there. And I think that was just a little point to say, you know what? We're not just going to slavishly do whatever either of you guys tell us to. We're gonna stick up for, little Aussie Australia, little Aussie battler. Now, does that mean that Australia is actually going to, reject or compromise or damage the US alliance? Absolutely no way. Because, of course, in the context of everything that Albo's talking about, the only reason why all of this happened, the only reason why Curtin's decision was so incredibly important is because the US did come to our aid. They did come and save us. They did come and help us out. Australian troops did incredibly well for the numbers that we had. But just mathematically, it would have been completely impossible for us to mount any kind of defence against the full Japanese imperial force. It needed US military numbers. It needed US military technology and materiel. It needed the ships and the planes. And it was the US in places like the Battle of the Coral Sea who stopped us, who stopped that Japanese invasion force. The Kokoda Track, of course, famously, stopped them from just being right there on our doorstep. So even though Albo just sort of snuck that in as a little little nipple cripple for Donald, maybe, it was incredibly subtle and by no means anything. It was just a little bit of a, just remember, we're all for Australia, and that's good. We should be patriotic and we should be strong. But the idea that we don't actually need the US or we're just junking that alliance, as some people have said, that will never, ever happen because it can never, ever happen. Look, I also want to talk about the anti-Semitic attacks in Melbourne. Over the weekend, we had a Jewish synagogue. Well, there aren't really many other types of synagogue. Firebombed. Someone's been arrested and taken into custody, so I guess it's allegedly firebombed now. And of course, we had these rampaging protesters that ran through an Israeli restaurant. I think they targeted a second one as well, chanting "Death, death to the IDF." We also had protesters outside Chris Minns' office last week, chanting, the Premier of New South Wales, of course, chanting "Death, death to the IVF." To the IVF. No, IVF's fantastic. Why wouldn't you want in vitro fertilisation? Death, death to the IDF. And this, of course, takes us back to, last week's massive story, which was this new chant of death, death to the IVF, which was effectively launched. And it really was launched like a product launch, like a marketing campaign by a punk duo called Bob Vylan at the Glastonbury Music Festival, which the organisers have since said was absolutely outrageous and they completely disabused them of it. But of course, they could have known better and they should have known better. And if they had have actually, got their heads out of their proverbial and looked around, they would have known better. And in the case of another act, they absolutely did, because one of their members was being charged with terrorism-related offences before he even performed. Anyway, but let's go back to Bob Vylan. So when and everyone's, there's been God knows how many column inches written about this. But as we all know, one of the pair of this duo, Bob Vylan, who is called Bobby Vylan, I know, it just whatever. He actually introduces this chant deliberately as a kind of software update. He actually says before he says, oh, everyone's chanting free, free Palestine. He goes, yeah, all right, that's fine. But have you heard this one? Have you heard the new one? So he's literally like the cool kid going, hey, have you got the latest gear? Have you seen this? Oh, you seen Beyonce's new album just dropped? It's literally like that. So he says this is the new slogan, right? Death, death to the IVF, which it's fair to say is a bit more violent and murder and killing related than free, free Palestine. That's all well and good. Who doesn't want Palestine to be free? But actually advocating the killing of people, that's kind of a bit... It's not exactly Woodstock vibes. It's not exactly peace, love and mung beans. Anyway, We've gone all over that before, but the point being is this is something that was deliberately introduced to be a craze. This is a guy who, when he says it, says, hey, have you heard this new thing? So he doesn't just start doing it, he's deliberately introducing it in a way to make it go viral. And that's what happened. On the other side of the world, a week later, you've got thugs wearing masks because they're too gutless to be identified and take accountability for what they've done. You know, they apparently care so much about Palestine, but they're afraid to put their face to it. But these people are now chanting this as they're charging through, restaurants, smashing things up, terrifying families who are out to dinner, whatever. And that is, I suppose, proof in itself of what this was intended to do. And this is nothing to do with the people of Palestine. We're going to talk about that issue and where it's at and where it's going seriously and look at what solutions are available with my guest this week. People who actually have experience in this, who know about it, who actually do care about outcomes instead of just showing how much they, so what humanitarians they are, what lovely, caring, virtuous people they are because they want to kill Israeli soldiers. That's how much they care. But of course, these people don't care about Palestine at all. It's purely performative. It is purely about them showing how morally pure or morally better they are than everybody else because they're even more impassioned, they're even more extreme in their moral virtue to the point where they're so morally virtuous they'd kill for it. It's a bit like John Cena in Peacemaker, another great DC outing. Superman is going to be awesome, by the way. Don't know if I mentioned that earlier. But John Cena says, I care about peace so much. I love peace. And I love peace and I care about it so much, I don't care how many men, women and children I have to kill to get it. That's what these people are saying. They care about peace so much, care about Palestine, they don't care about. But of course, this is the other catch. Because in another video, you can hear the singer from Bob Vylan bragging about, and again, so this is not just rhetorical. He brags about how much he supports violence. He says there's all these, there's another music festival that says there's all these, pacifist punks out there. He actually says that in a derogatory way. There's all these pacifist punks out there. We're not that, he says. He says, we're violent punks. Because violence is the only language that these people understand. This is exactly what he says. So he brags about being violent and brags about having to use violence against Israel or the IDF. But he's not doing it, is he? He's just talking about it. And he's too stupid to realise how obviously shambolic and transparently empty those words are. He's not going out and joining Hamas. He's saying how much he supports other people committing violence, other people being subjected to violence. And it is just staggering that the hypocrisy is just laid bare. It is out there for all to see. This is a guy saying, we're violent. He actually says, it doesn't even say he supports violence, he says, we're violent punks. So go and do it, buddy. You're so tough. Get on a plane, go to Gaza, join what's left of Hamas. You love the violence so much, go and do it. Because he thinks that that's the only way that Palestine can be freed. That's the only way that the people of Palestine can be liberated. This is what he says. He says it's the only way, but he's not doing it. By his own admission, he's not doing the one thing that he says needs to be done to achieve the cause that he says he is 100% committed to. It is absolute 100% bullshit. It is 100% lies, and it is being done in full view. And not only do all the tens of thousands of drones who are chanting along with this numpty not get it, he doesn't even get it himself. And yet it is all right there in front of us. Well, the big story, obviously, of the week and probably the year is will he or won't he? Will Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese get a meeting with the US President Donald J. Trump. They were meant to have one at the G7. Unfortunately, World War III broke out. Donald Trump had to run off and stop World War III, and we haven't been able to get a meeting with the big guy since. So what is going on with Australia's strategic and defence relationship with the US? What is going on with Australia's own defence policy? Because, of course, increasing defence spending is the one kind of craw that this meeting is stuck in. And what is going on in the Middle East? Are we really looking at a lasting ceasefire, a lasting, dare I say it, peace? Well, one man with rather unique insight into all of these things is my guest this week. He is a former defence advisor to the Labor Party when it was led by former Defence Minister Kim Beazley. He is a former cop, a former soldier. He's an expert in international law. He's a war crimes investigator. He lectures in these matters. He is a legal advisor to various secret, mysterious organisations in Israel, as well as teaching here in Australia. And most importantly, he joins me now. Glenn Kolomeitz, welcome to The Real Story. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. Good to see you again.
Great to see you again as well. You are, of course, in your most recent incarnation. On top of all that, you were a candidate for the Jackie Lammy Network, and you're the defence advisor for that. So you're someone, I suppose, who is almost uniquely placed, I think, to provide a kind of independent perspective on what is going on here. So my first question is, what is going on here?
You know something, the uproar about Elbow and Trump, I think it's, for a long time, the relationship has survived administrations and Australian governments, and it'll survive this one. That's the reality. I think there's a lot of carry on, but it's symbiotic. We need each other, and the current strategic circumstances haven't changed that relationship as far as I'm
Fantastic. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you.
See you later.
See you later. We've solved it. Every week we deliver world peace on this podcast. It's amazing how frequently we do it. That is great to hear, and it's great to hear, firstly, because it means that, world peace, and we're not going to get invaded by China, and World War III is not going to come and engulf it.
I didn't say that, but...
That's right. That actually will probably still happen. It's also great to live, because that's what I've been saying as well. So it's good to know that I'm not entirely mad. But so the meeting that fell through at the G7, it seems to me that's not really Donald Trump going, sorry, I'm washing my hair that night. That meeting was scheduled. It was going to go ahead. He had to go off and bomb Iran to prevent World War III. Seems like a pretty legit excuse. Why do you think, though, there seems to have been such a struggle to reschedule the meeting, and there have been reports that, Team Australia only found out about the cancellation sort of third hand, or once Trump had already left, there wasn't the kind of, complimentary phone call or whatever. Do you think that relations between Albanese and Trump are as bad as is being reported?
Look, I think the more important relationships here are the people who are out there, the operators out there in the world, the senior military, the senior bureaucrats. Trump and Albanese having a meeting, that's well and good. But we know that these relationships are being maintained and bolstered at the real world level, at the operational level, and the strategic level. So, look, really, eventually Albanese will see Trump, and Trump might give Albanese a hearing, but regardless, the wheels are still moving.
Yeah, so scaffolding around each of the leaders. The two governments are still talking to each other,
right,
even if their respective leaders aren't in the same room.
And we saw that under previous Labor governments. We've seen it forever.
Yep.
The scaffold, as you say, is still there. Yep.
And obviously, no meeting takes place until the defence leadership and the diplomatic leadership have already sort of orchestrated a result.
Oh, that's right.
Like they're going to say, right, we're going to meet, and you're going to agree to this, you're going to agree to that, and then we're going to walk out at the end. There'll be a joint communique, and I'm imagining it will say something like Australia is going to, completely regardless of America's demands. It turns out we were planning to increase our defence spending all along with this whiz-bang new project. We're going to increase this, and Donald Trump will come out and say, of course, AUKUS is still on the table. What made you think it was? And of course, we're going ahead with it.
That's right. The Oval Office is theatre. It's theatre, and as we saw, it was very good theatre with Zelensky, unfortunately. But it's theatre. The system works behind the scenes, and look, they'll make political announcements both ways, and we've seen this in the past too. Labor in opposition. When I was defence advisor, we had some issues with the US back then, and in fact, some US embassy staff took me out to lunch once and said, "Why do you guys not like us? I said, we love you.
We thought that you didn't like us.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't that strange? So, that's right. Oh, that's good. So that, obviously, we can all sleep well in our beds tonight. One thing that it has raised, though, it has kind of pulled back the rug on what is happening domestically with Australia's defence policy. And some of it is, without being alarmist, some of it is nonetheless pretty alarming. We know that there's this ridiculous long tail on when we get our new submarines. The Collins class ones are sort of on their last legs, sort of sputtering around, with only, one or two even in service. Even our on-water ships, there's only one or two actually out there in active service. These are reports that I'm reading. I'm like, that can't be right, but it seems it is right.
It is right. Look, the Defence Strategic Review, the DSR, was good. That was a good first move, and then implementing this national strategy was a good move, good follow-up move to the DSR. You have to implement this stuff.
Yep.
You can have all this wonderful stuff in on paper, and like you get through all the documents, all the coloured pictures and everything else. There's like 30 pages to each or something, right? So it's not as enormous as people think. But you have to distill that down to the real world and implement that stuff. And that's the problem. We're not implementing this stuff in a timely fashion because the wheels in defence move slowly. Risk aversion, the risk culture is terrible.
Yep.
And they spruiking innovation all through these documents, but we don't innovate in defence.
So the risk aversion, the fear of doing something wrong is actually paralysing. They end up not doing anything at all.
Absolutely right. Decision paralysis. Absolutely right. And because I can see why, because every major project we've had now for as long as I can remember has been blown out in time, blown out in cost. Some have fallen over. Some never got operational. They were mothballed before they were operational. So the bureaucrats are worried about their jobs and their ACs and AMs, whatever else they get as part of their salary package. So the risk aversion is just inherent. But we have to overcome that risk aversion to be able to properly be innovative as the government is pushing.
Because if you're so scared of not doing anything wrong, you end up in a position where you just don't do anything at all.
Absolutely right.
Which is worse.
Absolutely right.
And they're right to be worried about their jobs because Richard Marles is looking like he's had it up to the wazoo, had it up to Pussy's bow, if you will, and is going to take the axe to a bunch of top brass or top bureaucrats because of this paralysis, because there's been a lot of white papers being passed around and nothing actually being done.
I've said for a long time, you can't throw a stone in Canberra without hitting a general. And it's the same without hitting a defence bureaucrat. And quite frankly, the secretary, a lot of these failings, he's been there for a long time, Moriarty. A lot of these big project failings and big failings, moreover, have been on his watch. They can't abrogate the responsibility. They're on the big bucks. They're getting their honours and awards for doing their job, often poorly. Cull them, get back to bare bones, and put that money into getting more boots on the ground, more troops, and capability, which is more needed, more necessary.
I've actually taught, far be it from me to question your expertise, but like I've heard actual good things about Greg Moriarty. I've heard he came over from DFAT, was very obviously top dog there, came over to defence only a few years ago, and is he sort of, I get the sense that he is a man who is actually trying to get things done, but is himself sort of faced with this kind of, concrete sort of set of bureaucracy beneath him through which it's very hard to kind of chisel. It needs a pneumatic drill, if you like.
Look, I've watched him in estimates. I'm a bit of an estimates, a parliament nerd, right? As I'm sure you are, Joe. But I've watched him in estimates, and I think he really has to be more responsive. Yes, he is trying to chip through this impossible layer of risk aversion, but it happened in Veterans Affairs. They had a similar concrete barrier, and Liz Cosson, the former secretary, managed to chip through that in a pretty big way, and the current secretary is doing the same thing. I think there needs to be...
This resulted in delayed payments to veterans that were only addressed in the last budget.
Yeah, that's right.
Disgrace.
But a lot of the big ticket items were addressed eventually, right? They managed to chip through that bureaucracy. I think defence, this is a good move by Miles. I think it's a good message.
So is this what we're seeing, I guess? Are we seeing Miles and Moriarty actually going, right, that's it, we're taking a broom through the joint?
I suspect it is Moriarty driving that, absolutely. And that's a good thing, as you say. I would have liked to have seen more responsiveness on his part in estimates and elsewhere, but it is what it is, I guess.
A political advisor, as just the way we're talking now, but a political advisor once told me that their favourite description of any policy or announcement that their minister came up with was always long overdue, because it meant that the public was absolutely ready for it. It wasn't going to shock anybody. Everyone was going to agree with it. But again, it speaks to that sort of risk aversion. Let's then talk now about. So we've solved the we've solved Australia's defence
We're good.
strategy.
We're safe.
We've solved the relationship with the US. Let's go over and get some and solve the Middle East peace crisis. Benjamin Netanyahu has obviously just nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yep.
I've got the feeling that maybe the custodians won't give it to Donald Trump. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it, but I've got the feeling they're just not Trump guys.
Yeah.
They're not MAGA. But there are a lot of people, including our guest last week, Adam Slonim, who is the head of the Middle East Policy Forum, and very influential in the Labor Party. And again, these are not MAGA people. These are centred, sensible, moderate, experts like yourself. And they're saying what Trump did in Iran is actually a game changer and actually shows, A, that Trump is prepared to follow through on his threats. Maybe not all of them, but you never know which one he will. So that sort of keeps people in line. And B, they have just, bombed back Iran's nuclear program 5 or 10 years and made Iran aware that they can't just kind of bluff their way through things, lock out the inspectors and expect that nothing will happen. And it now looks like there's going to be some kind of ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. Netanyahu is dragging his feet on it, I believe, but Hamas has already agreed to the terms of a ceasefire proposed by the US and delivered by Qatar. And then you've got the Sheikh of Hebron, the largest city in the West Bank, saying, we don't want to be part of the Palestinian Authority anymore. We want to become an independent emirate that recognises Israel as part of the Abraham Accords, negotiated by Trump during his last administration. I realise I'm going on a bit, but I'm just sort of trying to, you put all these pieces together. We're actually looking at, dare I say, progress, dare I say, a sort of proto-peace.
These are good pieces, and as you say, Trump has been behind a lot of this good news story. The Abraham Accords will be a good outcome, and the fact that for recognition of Israel for a start, that's totally inconsistent with that's
anything that the Palestinian Authority has actually said.
So look, that's a good news story. That's absolutely a good news story, and Trump has done the right thing in this. Let's think back to 1981 when Iraq was developing their nuclear weapons capability. Israel bombed it, shut it down. The world, the French and the rest smacked it. Naughty Israel. US said, "Yep, you know what? That's good.
Worked.
That's good. That worked." Behind the scenes, the rest of the world are going, "Oh, thank you, Israel." Right? It's the same now.
Yeah.
Make no mistake.
Yeah. And do you think? What do you think that peace will kind of look like? Because obviously, and again, just to add another layer of kind of complexity to the jigsaw puzzle, but you've got Fatah in the West Bank, which is completely different to, in opposition to, and sworn sort of enemy of Hamas in Gaza. The Hamas leadership has been absolutely virtually annihilated. I think 80% of it has been wiped out. Israel is now trying to encourage other kind of factions to come up and sort of be the default source of power in Gaza. Then you've got the Sheikh of Hebron rising up against the Palestinian Authority, against Fatah. So it's very unclear who is in charge in any of these territories, Gaza or the West Bank, in either of them, let alone, and there seems no prospect of having any kind of unitary authority in charge of both of them. Are we looking at not a two-state solution, but something like a kind of multi-state solution?
Look, firstly, Hamas, we can write them off as they're not in charge.
Yep.
That's what they've been decapitated, and they're on the way out the door, and the population are rising up against them anyway. We're seeing that on a daily basis. But the PA has for a long time not recognised Israel. They've been as vocal, perhaps as vocal as Hamas in that regard. The Sheikh of Hebron, this is a game changer in that regard, and I think for the PA to have some say in a future government of sorts, they're going to have to moderate their tone and perhaps start talking to the Sheikh and start thinking about recognising Israel. You're right. I don't think it'll be a two-state solution because there's still the threat. There can't be a two-state solution when there are still people out there saying one-state solution, drive Israel into the ocean, right? So, look, there well may be some sort of power-sharing arrangement in those locations, and this is a good start. And that was the original intent of the Abraham Accords anyway, because the Accords originally they couldn't see a two-state solution being viable for a long time until all these issues could be addressed, and they weren't going to be addressed in the short term.
And these, of course, are for anyone who hasn't caught up with the last 10 years of Middle East politics, which is just a cinch, really. I mean, anyone can do it. Yeah. These are the accords, the agreements negotiated by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, good Jewish boy. That basically was this sort of breakthrough that no one thought would be possible, which is basically a deal between Israel and all the Sunni Arab Gulf states to basically recognise Israel, to allow Israeli passport holders to visit in some cases, which would have been unthinkable. They would not have been allowed in the country in years past. Allow Israeli commercial flights to fly over their airspace. Although I have to say, having personally experienced, you're still not allowed to drink over Saudi airspace, and that just ruined my flying experience
at altitude too. Right?
I know. It's just, what about my human rights?
I know, right?
And that's why it's so significant that the Sheikh of Hebron is now saying, yes, we actually want to be part of this. So
absolutely,
I suppose, could we have a situation where you have, a Gaza emirate, a West Bank emirate, a Hebron emirate, Golan Heights emirate, whatever.
Well, the point about the Emirates is a very good point, I think, and that's subdividing it that way is not without possibility. It's not unthinkable. But I think that really we still have to be able to stabilise Gaza as long as there's any footprint of Hamas and any thought on the part of the PA or Fatah about driving Israel into the ocean. Then none of this can take place, regardless of what the Sheikh says. But if the Sheikh has this influence, which I suspect he will have, the writing's on the wall. Yeah. So there could well be these entities around. Yeah. And
this is a report, obviously, that first emerged in the Wall Street Journal this week. So, impeccable source and impeccable reporter. So before we declare peace in the Middle East and just tick that box, on the other hand, you've got Benjamin Netanyahu, who is captive to ultra right-wing, ultra-orthodox, ultra-conservative, one of the three or all of the above in many cases. People, Jewish people who are just as eschatological, who think that, the Messiah can't come as long as there's Arabs living in Israel and that they too want to, wipe them out. Netanyahu is not one of them, but he needs them to stay in power, and he needs to stay in power or he's at extremely high risk or an almost certainty of prosecution. So it's a bit like Julius Caesar when he crosses the Rubicon. He has to keep his imperium, has to keep his authority, or he's personally screwed. And so he has got to get into bed with these far-right guys to keep his prime ministership. How does that prevent him from being able to reach a kind of compromise with any of these groups, given the sort of people who would have to back him? Does his Likud party have a chance? Do you think any of the centre parties could do a deal with him? They've refused to deal with his party, Likud, or him because of all his history. Is there a chance he could form a more moderate government that could get rid of the far-right element and do a deal? And also, has Israel radicalised a whole generation of Gazans who are just the next generation of Hamas because they've been so traumatised by all the bombing? So, can there be a lasting peace, or are these things still all just sleeping dragons waiting to awaken?
Yeah, let's look at the term we use in the army is the ground truth. Let's have a look at the ground truth. Yep. We have the IDF and Israeli police forces putting pressure on these settler communities. That's still happening now, regardless of what's happening in the Knesset and in Likud, of course, and in their coalition.
So telling Orthodox Jewish settlers back off.
It's happening in real time. Okay, great. All right, so that itself is a bit of an indicia that there is an appetite there. I think the more that the hard right see that, look, we need to get whichever hostages are still alive home safe, and we don't hold a lot of hope there, of course, but I think they're going to see the writing on the wall as well. And I think there must be a move towards the centre, because Israel can't go on like that forever. And the population has just had a pretty big hit from Iran for the first time for a while, to be honest. It's breached Iron Dome quite substantially. And I have friends right there now who are hearing the alarms every night, as I'm sure you do. Yep. So look, there must be a move that way. And I think you're quite right. Netanyahu he does rely on the hard right, but they must start moving towards the centre if they want to see resolution at the end. And the population will force that, I believe.
And do you think Gaza and Gazans will be similarly war-weary? Do you think they genuinely, because it's so hard to get accurate information out, let alone get inside the head of someone who the population, who the most of the majority. But do you think in terms of, do they blame Hamas more than Israel for what they have been through, and will they accept that? Will they be war weary enough to say, okay, no worries, peace, or will there be, a generation of children who are raised, maybe not the generation that just got bombed to smithereens, but their kids who become radicalised by it?
I think there will be a degree of radicalisation. We saw it in Afghanistan. We have people who are on the fence or were pro-coalition who overnight turned because something happened to their village, their people. It happens. It happens quite quickly. We saw it in Afghanistan quite often. I think there will be a radicalised element, but at the same time, we are seeing, as you say, when we can see some facts coming out of the place, the ground truth. I think we are seeing a move against Hamas, and that's contributed to the decapitation. I think the war weariness is a good point. I think at some stage there will always be a radicalised element. And that's not going to go away, right? But you can
people just want it to stop.
That's right, and they can domestically police that. Yep. Once they have an internal security force, which isn't Hamas, they can domestically police that.
There you go. Glenn Kolomeitz, you are always a source of hope and inspiration. There you have it. Peace in the Middle East, delivered once again on the Real Story podcast, and indeed world peace well. With brought to you by Glenn Kolomeitz, Donald Trump, and Anthony Albanese, and the Jackie Lambie Network. What a coalition. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
And that is all we have time for this week. Make sure you go and leave us a review or leave us a 5-star rating, similar to the ratings that Superman is getting, because it is just so awesome. You can send us an email at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au on any subject you like. For example, I don't know, how awesome Superman's going to be. You can slide into my DMs on the gram at Joe_Hildebrand. You can read me just everywhere. You can see me just everywhere. I'm just everywhere all the time, all at once. And next week, I'm going to be back with you again. Take care.